Thanks very much, everyone. It's really awesome to be here when I'm not freezing my butt off and I can actually feel my toes. I think the last time I was speaking here at B-Sides, it was the first year through, and show of hands, who was there for that one? You brave people, you've actually managed to get through without frostbite. That's awesome. Today I want to kind of take a little look through. I was just saying it's really interesting that some of the conclusions that some of the guys came with the talks this morning kind of head in the same direction that I'd planned for my talk today. So that's either really encouraging or we're all heading down the weird path and we need to start readdressing that. But who am I? I'm Rick. I've got the pretentious title of Lead Cloud Operations Specialist. I work for a consultancy, so you can imagine they like to give pretentious titles because it brings in the dollar. I am older than the internet. I know I don't look it. It's my youthful gingerisms. I'm the last of the Generation X before we started sliding on the Y path. I'm a veteran of multiple different incidents of critical systems. I work in the cloud, and currently I look after some critical national infrastructure for Scotland, not in the nuclear industry. I just happen to like tinkering with physics. So, if I was to say to you, what's your perception of a nuclear worker? What's the sort of thing that comes straight to mind? Oh. I wonder, what sort of things, radiation suits, crazy people, and I guess that, yes, pretty much the entire industry is now rattled around to come up with the idea that Homer Simpson is your typical nuclear worker. This will be a talk with some audience participation, so I hope you got your voices ready at some points. When we're talking about nuclear incidents, we have an international scale. This one goes from being, that's not too bad, there's a bit of paperwork to sort out, to, oh God, half the planet's on fire. Bear this in mind when we start going through some of the scenarios that we've had and what that's actually meant. I'm going to relate 4 incidents in the history of the nuclear industry. The lessons that we've learnt from those, the changes that have happened in the nuclear industry, and the bearing that it has on IT systems. And I'm going to wrap those around 4 different concepts for what a business could be, from small companies through to enterprises. And for our first one, the startup, which looks at having to learn as we go all the way back in time to Windscale. How many people here have heard of Windscale? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, good grief, more than I was expecting. You see, I was expecting all the youth to be in here, so I wasn't expecting to know what it is. Windscale is now called Sellafield. The original one was built early days to kickstart the nuclear industry in the UK. It is the first and worst nuclear incident that we have ever had in the UK. It is terrifying that we didn't end up with a worse environmental disaster. And you'll be surprised to know that they have not actually decommissioned the molten mess that is the pile. And that's not actually going to be completed in, well, they say 2037, but the guys are reckoning it's going to be in the 2040s. What was it put together like? Well, this was a first-generation nuclear reactor. So a bit like the Manhattan Project, you've got a big chunk of graphite, and you throw some nuclear fuel into the damn thing. And an interesting one that the UK decided to do was they didn't want to water cool it because they'd seen some problems with an American reactor that was very much the same. Big 50-foot pile of graphite, loads of fuel loaded into it, and the Americans were having problems with some cooling and the thing getting too hot and potentially hitting a nuclear meltdown point. So the UK went, aha, we're not going to water cool it because if we lose water, the thing's going to burn to the ground. We'll air cool it. So we'll put some ruddy great fans at the front of it, and then we'll force air through it to cool the thing. Now you might notice from here that on this diagram, there's nowhere that actually seems to be pulling energy out. There's no turbines. There's nothing that actually generates electricity. Why is that? Well, it was to kickstart the nuclear industry program, but it wasn't actually to generate electricity. And you kind of think, okay, well, is that just that it's a scientific thing? We're trying to learn things? And yes, that is the case. We were trying to learn about nuclear reactors, brand new industry, first in the field. The guys were kind of getting to terms with what was going on. They put some chimney scrubbers in, because, if you're shoving air past things that are nuclear fuel, you kind of want to make sure that if there's radioactive particles, you filter those out before you throw it into the environment. They didn't really want to have to do that because they're expensive, and by the point that they'd thought, maybe this is a good idea to put some scrubbers on there, they'd already started building chimneys. So they ended up with them at the top, which is why it looks weird. The control room's very basic controls, but the whole point was that we were making nuclear material so we could blow stuff up. And at the time, we're trying to get in bed with the Americans to get the nuclear program. It's post-war. The Americans want to keep all the nuclear secrets themselves. They want the bomb. They want in control of it. UK's wrangling for that. So the government puts pressure on. We need to get a bomb. We need to get this massive detonation so that we can be in league with America and share nuclear secrets. To do this, they realised that these cartridges and these weird-shaped things here, these actually had the nuclear fuel in, and these were pushed through the pile. They would react together, and they would generate products in it that you could then use for nuclear bombs. Great, no problems, fine. These things are fairly safe-ish. We're kind of learning what's going on. We've had a few kind of minor incidents with getting the thing online, but we need to do it faster. So what do? They start trimming off the fins from these things so that they can create more heat, more generation. So what happened? Well, the temperature on this pile rose at one point, and they'd seen this before, and they were starting to learn the physics behind this, that if you put enough nuclear product next to graphite, it changes the structure of graphite. It starts to get hot. It starts to store energy inside it. This basically ends up with hot zones that you can't cool easily because it's stored energy. It's like having a big battery or a capacitor that you're throwing energy into. And the only way to discharge it is to get everything hot and let it all cool out naturally. So, okay, they've got this thing that's called a Wigner release, where they basically heat the whole thing up and they let it cool down again. So they did that and it didn't seem to work, and they thought, that's a bit funny. Okay, we'll do it again. So they got the thing hotter, and at this point they're thinking, this is getting quite hot, this is close to graphite melting type temperatures. Better turn the fans on. So the fans are ramped up. The radiation monitors start to kick off that there's particles going up the chimney. So, okay, maybe we've got a burst cartridge or something. This has happened before, because the cartridges get pushed through the pile and then they drop into a pit, and sometimes they don't drop into the water properly and they have to have someone push it with a stick and get it into the water. Real safe things. It was the 50s after all. So they think, okay, maybe it's just a burst cartridge. Lift up one of the lids. This thing's on fire. So, everyone, I would like you to repeat after me. Blimey, Governor, hold my cup of tea, I've got an idea. Blimey, Governor, hold my cup of tea, I've got an idea. Excellent, let's turn the fans on and put them really high power to blow this out. Who knows what happens when you put lots of oxygen into a fire? Yes, that's right, the entire pile goes up in flames. So, this spreads the fire out to the other channels. They attempt to start ejecting the cartridges using scaffolding tubes and all sorts to get things out of the way and create a fire break. And then they're kind of like, this isn't working, there's still graphite on fire and there's all sorts of nuclear fuel on fire and this is really bad. Okay, we've got some carbon dioxide that's just been delivered for the nuclear reactor that we're just about to commission next door. Let's pile that in, but they couldn't deliver it in sufficient quantities. So let's pour water into it. What's water made of? Hydrogen and oxygen. When it gets hot enough, it splits. You get a nice gas that explodes, and you get some nice gas that explodes. So, This is a little bit risky. They try this and start shoving hoses in the front of the thing to get it cooled down. Doesn't quite work. They eventually think, right, what the hell do we do? And one of the guys who's running the place is on top of the pile, looking down into the flames, trying to look from an angle so he doesn't get completely burned away with the radiation. Shut the fans off, shut all of the air off, seal the place up. So they did that. Flames died out instantly, and they continued piling in water for the next day to try and stop the rest of it. Lessons learned. Fans, really, guys? So they started to learn about, what the effects caused by stored energy. They start looking at, the way that we're doing this. This isn't the best reactor type. Let's scrap that. Let's do something else. A lot of this was covered up, which is why a lot of you probably don't know about it. Because at the time, we were trying to make sure that we could get into the nuclear programs. So, what do we learn in IT from this? New processes will always put you into unknown situations quickly. And when you're in a startup, for those of you that probably work in a startup, you'll have experienced this. The first teams that implement a new technology are going to have to learn skills quickly. You're going to have to figure things out that you've never seen anyone else do. If you're not going to design safety features in at the beginning and consider potential outcomes, you're probably going to run into them, because Murphy's Law says that anything that's going to go wrong is going to go wrong. And you need to document all of the processes as you go, and be prepared to write off the first versions. I've been there. I've been in the startups. We've learned some of the lessons. We've fought the fires early on. But once you get past your startup, you start moving into an established business. So, hey, this thing's kind of working. We're rolling out to more things across the country. Who's heard of 3 Mile Island? A couple of you? Not many of them. 3 Mile Island is basically the incident that brings us to The Simpsons. So when you think of nuclear power and The Simpsons and the chaos that it is and the crazy plant that there is, that's basically based on 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was 2 nuclear power plants on an island 3 miles long. It's in the name, Americans. It was the most significant accident in the United States commercial nuclear industry. It happened in 1979. On that crazy scale, we're also at a number 5. So wind scale was a 5 that had disaster beyond its surroundings because it ended up with loads of people contracting cancer. This was also a 5 out of 7. The biggest thing for 3 Mile Island was that it was the financial impact that actually mattered most to the company, because we had a $4 billion asset turn into a $1 billion negative liability within the space of around 2 hours. It was a product of the manufacturers basically knowing information and not sharing it with the people that were running their plants. And it basically stalled the nuclear program in the US through fear. So what was it like? Well, as you can see, it's not a pile like Windscale was. And there's a whole generation bit on it. We're going to generate some electricity. We've got our reactor building. We've got our turbine building. We've got cooling towers. You can see something that's a little bit different on this one. And this big thick line around here is something that came in on these Generation 2 reactors, which is containment building. Nice big thick structure, several feet thick, reinforced concrete, creates an environmental shield, creates a blast shield, should there be anything, keeps everything nice and condensed inside. Diagram on the right is the state of the nuclear core after the incident, and you can see there's a load of chlorite at the bottom there that basically is the melted fuel and some of the cladding. So what happened? So the manufacturer was already aware that there were problems with some of the valves. They didn't tell anyone about this, and some other plants had encountered the problems. There was a similar incident 13 months before 3 Mile Island, and fortunately, they were running in a low power mode on their reactor, and they discovered that the pumps were, the valves were stuck on the pumps. Full system checks basically weren't being done because, well, it's a brand new plant. Why would you want to do full checks? You know, it's new. I ain't going to check it. That's costly. That takes time. Maintenance wasn't being undertaken correctly. There were some examples in the presidential report of the stalagmites and the stalactites starting to build up on some of the coolant pipe work, and that sort of thing should have been spotted straight away. The operators themselves were basically untrained. You know, some of these guys are the clever enough guys, but they've not really had any hours on the reactors. Control room itself was really poorly designed. Stuff everywhere. If you can imagine The Simpsons and the way that Homer has his panels, it was basically the same. Everything's shouting. Everything's screaming off constantly. And there's buttons everywhere. There's control things. You're having to scoot from one side to the other. And you'd get fatigue. Now, we can see this in the security industry. We can see this in the operations industry. That if we've got alerts that are coming in, if you've got 50 alerts screaming at you constantly, what happens? You start to ignore all of the alerts. You stop worrying about anything that starts screaming at you. So what happened? Okay. The primary pump to the cooling circuit fails. No problems. We've got backup pumps. So, automatic startup of the backup pump. No problems. The plants in the Generation 2 are designed to be semi-self-healing. So, great. Starts up, automatic start with the pump. Boom! Pump starts to run. We're get water coming through the thing. But the backup pump couldn't deliver any of the water due to the fact that someone had manually turned off the valves. So the temperature rises in the reactor because it's got no inrush of water. The water that's stuck in that loop is getting hotter and hotter with the reaction in there. Okay, no problems. Second safety thing happens. The temperature's risen. The pressure's gone up because the water's getting hotter and hotter. The relief valve opens so that it doesn't get too high pressure. No problems. Poof. Relief valve goes, starts to dump out some of the pressure into the relief tank. No problems. Because that's opened, the reactor now goes, I'm in an unsafe state, I'm going to scram. Scram, for those that don't know it, is safety control rod, and originally it was Axeman, because it used to be, when it was early days, a guy with an axe chopping the rope, letting the boron rods drop through, kill a reactor, kill the reaction. It's now the automated systems that basically do that for us. We don't have the guy with an axe just dropping everything in. So, okay, system scrammed, reaction stopped. Indication in the control room says that the valve is now closed, but it's not. The emergency core cooling system basically goes, this thing's hot, so I'm going to dump a load of water into the thing. Great, excellent, all of this is automated. If they'd have stopped about here, this would have just been a footnote in the nuclear industry. But they didn't. So the operators go, well, why is the ECS gone on? The valve's closed, everything should be fine. I'll turn you off. So the operators turn off the control cooling system. The backup pump valve was discovered closed, and so they manually opened it again for the inlet pump. The water from the reactor loop continues basically then to pour through the reactor and into the relief tank, because we've got the relief valve that's still stuck open. The reactor core basically starts to get uncovered because you're dumping all of the water out faster than you can flood stuff in. At some point, some genius goes, oh, you know what? That tank's getting full. We've got a gauge that says that tank's getting full and it's starting to overflow. The there must be a valve that's open. So they go and they manually get down onto the floor and they shut the thing. So everyone say, "Hey y'all, I got a great idea."
Hey y'all, I got a great idea.
Hold my beer. I'm gonna put the ECCS back on.
Hold my beer. You're gonna put the ECCS back on.
Awesome. You put something cold onto something really hot, what happens? Yeah, that's right. You pour cold water onto hot metal, it's going to start to crack. So they start pouring cold water into the damn thing, it cracks, the nuclear product starts to release into the product, into the reactor vessel, and then hydrogen's produced inside the thing because now you're splitting water because it's getting so damn hot, and you've got all sorts of different reactions going on, and then it explodes inside the thing and sets off some pressure sensors, and that damages the core even more. Yeah, lessons learned. So, in all of the process, there was a huge chunk of cleanup, there was a load of decommissioning that they had to do over the next few decades. There wasn't a lot of outside environmental impact because most of it was contained in the radiological environment. A lot of it was contained within the buildings, it was designed to do that. They discovered like this defense in depth worked. Okay, so we had automated systems, they were working, some idiot turned things off, some idiot turned things back on again. But on the whole, if they just left it, the automated systems would have worked. The defense was working. Maintenance was absolutely critical to make sure that that was going to work. And sensors and indicators should indicate the state rather than what was happening. It was showing the electrical connection. Could I send a current to the valve instead of, is the valve actually closed? And one of the things that they changed on all of the Generation 2 and then Generation 3 reactors is to actually indicate where the valve is. They realized that training is massively important, and now in the nuclear industry, you do like 3 weeks on the reactor, normal conditions, and then 1 week in a simulator, which looks exactly like your standard control room, except everything goes wrong that week. And you basically have to train on what to do. So they looked at it all, they looked at the control room, they realized that there was tags over things you couldn't see, bits and pieces, you had to go from one side to the other. They've regenerated all of the Generation 2 control rooms, and all of the Generation 3s were very different as well. All the new generators, the generating reactors, basically have passive cooling so that you can not rely on this ingress of water. So you can just literally let the thing scram and it'll cool down with convection. Gen 4s are brilliant. So what do we learn in IT? Well, sharing information around faults and common failures downstream is super important. How many of us have suffered with products where something's been known to the manufacturer, but they haven't told us? Huge security hole in a product, major flaw in it, data goes missing. They could have told us, we could have patched it, we could have fixed it, we could have done something, but they haven't told us. We've got to make sure that we've got defense in depth. And this is something I try and design into any of the cloud systems that I'm working on. That you are not just relying on one single thing to stop the whole process, that you've got multiple stages. Maintenance is absolutely key to ensuring safe practices. If you don't maintain the thing, by entropy, it's going to start to degrade over time. You're going to run out of patches, you're going to get out of your software cycles, you're going to end up with bugs creeping into the system. Automated processes can and do work. If you can automate it, automate it. Get it off someone's desk. Get it off someone's mind because they're going to forget about it. They're going to miskey something. Automate the systems. Provide your teams with clear observability about what's happening. This is key for operations, for security personnel. You need to know what's happening on the system. You don't want to know something that's happened 5 days ago unless that's what you're searching for to do some root cause analysis. You need to know now, live, what's happening. So we've got an established business. But we go through some hard times. We get to the struggling business where we're having to run as cheap as possible with limited experts. Chernobyl. Who's heard of Chernobyl? Yes. who lived through it. There's only a few of us. Chernobyl. Obviously, we've had recently quite a bit of interest in the sort of the HBO series and things on it, which was a quite good adaptation. Chernobyl was, to this day, the worst global nuclear incident, which happened in the old Soviet Union, it's actually now in Ukraine, and some of you will know that there's been renewed worry and concern around that, with Russia moving all of its troops through Ukraine and going through all of the danger zone. It was ranked 7 out of 7 on the international nuclear event scale. This was a major incident. We don't know how many people are going to die from what happened. The official figures put it at something ridiculous, like about 40 dead because of it. The reality is that the lasting effects, the leukemias, the cancers, all of the contamination that happened to the surrounding areas, we're not going to know for generations how many people are going to be affected. And the biggest thing was that it was an avoidable accident. So, Chernobyl was an RBMK 1000 reactor. This one looks a lot more complicated than the previous ones. Lots and lots of pipework, lots and lots of things. This looks quite big, actually. If I'm looking on here, this reactor pile is quite big. One of the things you'll notice straight away is that there's a really great floating crane above it that does all of the loading and unloading of fuel from the top, which makes it nice and cheap to do that. There isn't a huge, strong structure around it. We don't have a big containment field around it. We've got an environmental cap. We've got a lid on the thing. So we've got an upper shield, and we've kind of got some lower environmental shields, a few floors down with some concrete. But we don't have a big structure because this is a massive building. So to create a big containment field like we had at 3 Mile Island, that would just be extortionate. And we need these things to be cheap because we're the Soviet Union. You know, we're pulling not a lot of money from people to generate social services and everything that we need, the infrastructure. And we can't really afford to have expensive reactors. Well, let's use the cheapest, nastiest fuel that we can get to run these things. So they designed this, and it was a product of evolution. And in general, the theory was sound. However, the RBMK reactors, although they were cheap to build and run, with not having a containment building, if there's any problems, you're leaking it straight into the structure, and then there's not a lot to get, you know, from that point to the outside world. And they'd also suffered prior incidents in Leningrad with the first ever one that they built. That one went almost prompt critical as well. And that was covered up. And no one knew about it. Not the scientists, not the people that were running it. No one. Because at the time, the Communist Party basically silenced everything. They also had a problem of xenon poisoning. And xenon is a gas, and it's produced on the back end of the nuclear process in these things. It collects in the reactors, and it's an inhibitor. So it quenches some of the nuclear reactions. You expect that to happen through normal operation. When it's running at sort of full power, that burns off, that decays into different products. If you ever get poisoning of the reactor, you shut it down, you leave it for a few half-lives. In 2 days' time, you can start the reactor again. At Chernobyl, the safety practices were excessively lax. And that was down to management of the place, and it was down to the lack of any kind of control over these things. The proper test procedures were not followed for this. And the operators believed that the RBMK was basically indestructible. What happened? Well, the commissioning of the 4th reactor required a safety sign-off. All reactors need a safety sign-off. And this was scheduled several times, but they kept having to do things. Stuff wasn't working. They couldn't pass this test. They needed to do it to make sure that it was sign-off, get it off the desk. It had been sitting there for about a year. And they needed to be around 700 to 1,000 megawatts with the turbines running at normal speed to run the test to check if the power went off. Before the diesel generators kick back on, can we use the turbines to power the cooling pumps to keep everything safe? Yeah, okay, that sounds sensible. You know, we want to keep cooling going, no problems. So the day shift and the engineers properly briefed and knew what was going to happen. They got the reactor in a good state. They slowly ramped down all of the reactor to the right kind of power levels. They had to disable the ECCS with authorization from the chief engineer, because otherwise that would try and do cooling and scrams and all sorts of things. We want to do a real world type environment. Okay, last minute, get a phone call from the grid. I need you to stay online. There's a problem with another plant. We need more power on the grid tonight. Can you ramp back up? All right, okay, no problems. Ramp back up. They do a sign over to the night shift. Night shift's going to have to do this one. The ECCS is left switched off. So night shift starts and the power is reduced to 700 megawatts. Now we've gone down in power, back up in power. We're now going back down in power. We're not burning off the xenon. We get to around about 500 megawatts with the rods having to be moved to keep the power at that, and then it shoots all the way down to 30 megawatts and basically goes into a shutdown state. So with the middle of the night, with the night shift, they don't really know what they're doing, never done this before, not experienced on the things. The reactor should have been shut off for 2 days basically to get this thing back into a good condition. So everyone say, "Da, comrade, I have excellent plan. Let us drink vodka and start the process." There we go, you see, audience participation works every time. So, they attempt to start the test, but we're on a really low power. We don't really have control of the reactor. They have to violate safety active margins to actually get this test to work. So they're turning off all of the automated systems that are going to have safety. Out of the 167 control rods that's supposed to be in this thing, they have 8. 8. Not 80, not 18, 8. This thing basically goes to a state where it freaks out. So it automatically goes into scram mode, reckons like everything's going weird, starts throwing water through this thing. The water becomes the main neutron absorber in the reaction, starts creating more reactivity because of the way the reactor's built, and then they shut the turbines off. Coolant increases, temperature's going up, pressure's building up in this thing, feedback loop starts to build up in it as the water heats up, creates more cavities, creates more reaction, everything starts to go into a really uncontrolled state. They press the AZ5 button, which is supposed to scram the reactor. This takes 18 seconds to scram RBMK reactors because it has to move all the control rods down the way that they are. The split with a rod in the middle, it's displacing water, it's pushing water out of the way as it's going through. Very slow process. So they start to go through the core. As they push the water out of the way, the reactor power spikes because suddenly you've got these graphite rods sitting in the reactor now. You're pushing water out the way, you're creating all sorts of cavitation within it. With the rods partially inserted, it goes from 200 megawatts to 530 megawatts in 5 seconds. Generates a massive amount of steam. And then the power spikes to over 30,000 megawatts. With that much thermal energy, it blows the 1,000-ton lid off the top of the reactor, which was the first explosion. So now you've got a reactor that's been torn to pieces. The hydrogen that's then produced from all of this splitting water and all sorts then creates a further explosion and ejects 25% of the reactor everywhere. Starts setting buildings on fire. The reactor building that's next door, because obviously Chernobyl was 4 reactors. There were 2 planned to be built. They were basically scrapped after this. But they kept the other ones running. They didn't tell them to scram and shut down. No. Put your respirators on, take some iodine tablets, keep going, guards. So you've got fire services turning up, the graphite fire is going, it's chaos. Some of you have watched the program, some of you lived through it. What did they learn from the whole process? Well, there was a huge outcry across the world because everyone noticed it, because the entire planet got a dose of radiation. The operators learned a very sharp lesson. There were a lot of things that came of that. The operation, the RBMKs, was modified. They increased the control rods in the thing. They created brand new absorbers. They started creating faster scram processes. And they also made sure that there was precautions against people overriding the security processes. What can we learn, though? As an organisation, with running on a budget, no experts, secrecy reduces and increases, reduces safety and increases the likelihood of avoidable accidents. And you need to train teams in these things to make sensible choices, not just to do reactive things. Cutting the corners can lead to consequences later. Bypassing automatic controls and safety systems is unwise. Cleanup is more costly than prior containment. How many people have we seen that have not secured their data over the last few years, and the containment of that and trying to get the damage mitigation on the back end of it? Looking at you, LastPass. So, last one. I know we're pushing on time. Do apologise. Scenario for the enterprise. Establish business processes, and we've got experts in. Come on. There we go. Fukushima. Who remembers Fukushima? See? What was it you done? Where have you been sleeping for the last 12 years? Oh, you were at school, okay. So the nuclear accident at Fukushima Daiichi followed an earthquake and a tidal wave in Japan in 2011. It is ranked 7 out of 7 as well on the nuclear scale for oh holy hell. It was a 1 in 10,000 chance of basically happening. It'd never seen a tidal wave of that size before. We'd never seen earthquakes really in the last kind of 100 years of that scale before. Nearly 20,000 people drowned initially in the region, and it absolutely devastated all the coastal lines and then further inland as well. It ended up with 150,000 people displaced because of what happened to the reactors. You can see that this reactor looks a bit more kind of sci-fi. It's a bit kind of, 50s sci-fi kind of reactor. That's because it takes quite a while for reactors to be designed. But it has much more control mechanisms. It has much more suppression systems, safety things, because it knows it's going to be run in a potential earthquake zone. So they design these things in a lot stronger way. Big containment building, lots of concrete structure at the bottom. We do have some open pond bits that the spent fuel's put in inside the reactor, but it's inside the containment building. Yes, we've got blast panels at the top, but they're designed to blow out if there's hydrogen gas buildup, so that the main reactor is safe. Looks good, looks okay. We've got all of the control systems, we've got backup generators. We're all good. We're fine. You know, we've been running these things. It's not a problem. General Electric built these. You know, States is providing us with all the stuff. It's great. No problems. Excellent. On the lead up to it, they were told multiple times that there's the potential of flooding of the generators because they put the generators in the basement. Who puts generators in the basement? Below the water level. They ignored all of the precursor warnings. They ended up, thankfully, we had 3 reactors shut down for maintenance, and we had a magnitude 9 earthquake for about 10 minutes, which is the longest one that we've had recorded, which created a massive tsunami wave, basically broke over the protective walls. The automated systems are like, no problems, it's an earthquake, scram the reactors, 3 that are still there, shut them off, no problems. Great, we're good. Everything's shutting down, there's still cooling water going through, we're fine. We lose power to the grid, no problems, we've got generators, I'll start up the generators automatically, everything's cool, no problems. 14-meter tidal wave hits, floods the facility, rattles through the facility, goes into the basement, shorts out all the electrics, floods all the generators, all the power goes off. It's okay, we've got batteries. So the batteries start running all of the equipment, no problems. We've got 8 hours of battery life. That should be fine. You know, we can still see what's going on. Let's shut down anything we don't need to run so we can prolong the battery life, and we'll phone for some new generators. Oh, all the roads are out. all of the infrastructure's totaled. We don't have power lines to the grid. Well, we've still got one reactor online. We've still got one generator online. Can we jerry-rig something? So they start to lose visibility of all the systems, and in the following hours, 3 of the reactors overheat due to just the decay heat and no water circulating. Some of that escapes into the building, and we can all probably remember seeing on the news these things going patoof and then sending shockwaves out over the surrounding area. These weren't nuclear explosions. These were just hydrogen explosions. The buildings are designed to do this. That was fine. It was blowing building up. It was causing chaos to the site. But it was designed to do that so that the reactor wasn't damaged, that it let the energy out. After that, the emergency services managed to spray the whole now damaged infrastructure, but the contaminated water then leaks into all of the sea and the surrounding areas. They've finally managed to jerry-rig the generators, and they start stealing batteries from cars to power some of the systems so they can reduce the risk. What did they learn? They were given multiple opportunities with potential issues. The defense in depth mechanisms themselves worked to a large extent. The things were contained. The release of radiation to the environment was small-ish, not as bad as Chernobyl. Containment was basically a problem because of some leaks and things from the earthquake. But what they realized was that they could start to put these things in called passive autocatalytic hydrogen recombiners, which is basically like a catalytic converter for a power station. It takes hydrogen in and produces water so that you don't get these big explosions. I love these big words, they're great. The filter containment venting can now happen. On Fukushima, we had to vent it to the outside world, but they've now retrofitted a lot of things to depressurize the reactors that get too hot and filter out all the radioactive content. What can we learn in IT? Well, you can't always prepare for the edge cases, but you can make inroads to them. Can't always think, this is going to work and this is going to happen all the time on these ones, but we can make an inroad. Good maintenance is critical to the defense in-depth processes. We need to listen to our engineers. If they're saying, you've got flood risks, you've got problems with this, you've got data here, you've got security rules allowing the world in, you need to sort these things, we need to listen to them. You need to build in good margins of safety with these systems and layer the defenses. Learn from your incidents and iteratively improve. So what can we draw from all of those? Kill chain defense. You probably all heard this within security. And your communication to teams, critical. You've got to train your operators as well. You need regular maintenance cycles. You need to be doing that. If you're not doing it, then really, guys, just like I would urge you to push your teams to do regular maintenance. Consider your runtime requirements. Who's going to be looking after it? Who's going to be operating it? What they're going to be seeing. Make intuitive decisions based on good information. Backup and restore strategies are super critical. We started off looking at the international nuclear event scale, but we can equally transition that to an operational devastation scale with exactly the same categories, just changing it to being systems and data. It's scary how we can end up with systems that go into insane territory really quickly. So that was long. I'm really sorry for those that thought it's too long, didn't listen. Automated failsafe, defense in depth, regular maintenance, containment methods for your boundaries and critical items, train your staff, communicate. The worst will happen, plan and prepare for it. So, what's your perception of insert job title? They're not evil people. They're just innocent men. Just normal men trying to do the best they can. And that's all we are. We're just trying to do the best job we can, and we will end up with accidents, we'll end up with problems. But if you can't remember the past, you're condemned to repeat it. Bonus one, before I get thrown off the stage by Sam. The material that Homer uses on the front of The Simpsons, because of its colour, because of the glow on the way he's handling it, it has to be cobalt 60. If that's cobalt 60, it takes Homer 10 minutes to get home. He wouldn't even make it home. At the point that he starts throwing it out the car, he's irradiated his body, his insides are goop, he's deciding to die on the side of the road. How does he do that? The guy is like, I don't know, made of boron or something. But anyway, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, B-Sides.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Rick that do not involve Homer Simpson? Do we have any questions? Right.
Just going back to the Fukushima one there. There's obviously somebody, if I think about security and IT, somebody had identified the vulnerability, which was the generators are under the the water table or what have you. Did they just dismiss it as unlikely?
Yes. So they did two things. One, they had a flood. They had some water get into one of the generator basement parts. And what they did was they installed some doors on that one. So they did react to stuff post-event on one of them, but then they ignored the rest of it that basically said, we know you've had like tidal waves of this, your storm wall's 10 meters. It's likely this is going to be bigger than that. And they just kind of went, nah, it's not going to happen. So they've just kind of left it. So they did in part, but it wasn't good enough.
So it's Japanese for do.
Do-san!
Any other questions for Rick?
Returning to the Fukushima one, I thought the reason it all blew up was that the fire engine, they forgot to fill it up with diesel, and that was what was doing the pumping, and they couldn't get back to it, so they ran out of diesel, and then everything went wrong. And then the second thing is, what's your view on the current power station in Ukraine and how that's going to end?
Okay, so the first point around what was causing the explosion, that was a result of some of the gases leaking from the damaged reactor itself and into it, and uncovering of some of the spent fuel ponds that were inside, basically ending up with hydrogen inside. They did try and hook up some of the fire engines when they managed to get them through, because they were fighting effectively 4 reactors at the time. They had problems with those, and at one point they hooked up. There was an explosion that damaged all of the hookups. They then had to go and get more electrical connections refixed, and they had to get the fire engines to hook up bits and pieces again. So it was a multi-stage on that. In regards Chernobyl and kind of the way that things are, I don't think we're in a bad state. There was some issues of radiation going up because they basically drove an army through there. That's going to kick up dust. Tanks are not exactly. They did. The poor soldiers didn't realise where they were and were just digging trenches. I'm just going to dig my own grave. Yay! Hello, leukemia. They were causing all sorts of craziness there. I hope that things are going to resolve themselves over there very soon. I don't think there's any danger. The technicians over there are all fine. They're free to move around now. They're not working under stress situations, but it is something that is going to last for hundreds of years as a problem.
A round of applause for Rick.